Hey everybody, good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started. It's a little after 6:30. Want to be mindful of everybody's time. This is Cooking with Plants. It's our very last class of the year. Hopefully you've been able to join some of our other classes that we've done throughout this year. But if not, don't worry. We've got some links for you to watch recordings, and we have class coming again next year, which you can participate in. Tonight, our class is going to be focused on plant-based baking. It is the holiday season. We're getting excited about cozy, comforting foods. There's lots of celebrations coming up. So we wanted to give you some tips and tricks if you're trying to still eat plant-forward, or you want to give your holiday recipes a plant-forward makeover, some ideas on how you might do that. Before we get started, I just want to remind everybody that you are muted and your cameras are off, not because we don't want you to participate, but because we are recording these classes and it helps us have a cleaner recording when there's no background noise or lots of people's faces on the screen. If you do have questions that come up during tonight's class, I don't have anybody online who's answering questions tonight, so I would ask that you please email us at lifestylemedicine@trinity-health.org, and I will make sure to answer your questions by the end of the week. So again, that's lifestylemedicine@trinity-health.org. With that, I am going to do one quick tech thing and make sure that we're in. Oops, sorry, real quick. There we go. So for those of you who I have not yet met, my name's Kelly Wilson. I'm a registered dietitian with the Trinity Health Ann Arbor Lifestyle Medicine team. Our lifestyle medicine is a medical subspecialty that uses evidence-based information in 6 key pillars to treat, reverse, and prevent chronic disease and promote whole person health. Those 6 pillars are a whole food, plant-forward dietary pattern, which is what we cover in this class series, joyful movement, healthy stress reduction, restorative sleep, avoiding risky substances, and social connection. I am not the only person on our lifestyle medicine team. All of these smiling faces are the folks at Trinity Health Ann Arbor who make up the lifestyle medicine department. We all use those 6 pillars in one-on-one appointments with patients to help folks live their best life. And we use that information in group classes like this cooking class series and our Foundations of Lifestyle Medicine class series, which I'll tell you a little bit more about at the end of today's class. This class, like I mentioned, is the last one of a year-long series that we've been doing once a month throughout 2023. You can see on this slide here all of the classes that we've covered, a lot of different topics. So if you're sad because you missed something, or you want to go back and watch a recording of something that you want to refresh your memory on, if you open up the camera on your phone and you hold it to that QR code, it'll take you to a website, and you'll also get this emailed to you after class. That website has all of our recordings from our past classes. It has all of our recipes that we've covered in each class, and it will have tonight's slides, recipes, and recording next week once we get all of those together. So make sure you bookmark that website so you can go back and watch the recordings and download tonight's recipes. So like I said, today we're going to be talking about baking because it's really seasonally appropriate. And we want to start with kind of the science behind baking, because we're going to talk about some whole food, plant forward swaps to kind of up the plant food portion of our baked recipes. And we want to understand the science behind the ingredients that we're going to be using before we make swaps. So we know that when we make certain swaps, how it might impact the quality of that baked good. We're going to talk through some really easy swaps that you probably have in your pantry already. And then we're going to go through 4 recipes, a muffin, a couple cookies, and a brownie recipe. So you're going to have lots of ideas for tasty treats that you can make to bring to any holiday gathering that you have coming up. So let's get into a little science. We're going to cover a few key ingredients in baking, and the first of those is fat. So fat, when we think of fat in baking, typically we're thinking of butter, or you'll often see a vegetable oil used in a recipe. Those fats, they function by adding a lot of flavor to our recipes, and they support leavening. And leavening is basically fluffiness of our baked goods. So it's adding more air to the baked goods. If you think about when you make cookies, for example, often you'll see a step in the recipe that tells you to cream together your butter and your sugar. That process of mixing together your butter and your sugar is creating a web that holds little pockets of air that then help make your baked good lighter and fluffier. So fat can help with leavening. Fat's also really important for texture in baked goods. And this is because fat and water don't mix. Fat is hydrophobic. And when we mix fat in with our flours, for example, the fat coats the proteins in those flours and makes them less able to absorb a lot of moisture. So it slows down the formation of gluten, which is a protein in wheat-based flours. And if we get an overdevelopment of gluten, our baked goods can be really tough and chewy. So fat can help slow down this process and keep our baked goods really nice and tender and prevent that overdevelopment of gluten. Fat also is really helpful when we're thinking of making flaky things like, for example, pie crust is probably the most standard example where directions typically tell you to cut in cold butter or shortening. And that is because those cold chunks of fat, and they're saturated fat, which melts at a higher temperature, they create little pockets in the dough that as the fat melts, the dough is cooking and setting around that fat before that fat completely melts, and so it creates little air pockets in our dough, which then leads to that flakiness. Okay, and then fat also is really important for moisture, so it adds to kind of a moist crumb, which is also kind of related to the texture. All right, eggs, another critical ingredient in a lot of baked goods. Eggs also add moisture because if you've ever looked at an egg, it's really watery. The white part of the egg is mostly water, a lot of protein, but also mostly water. Eggs also help with leavening. If you think about if you've ever whipped egg whites, made a meringue, or just beaten egg whites with a beater, you're incorporating a lot of air bubbles into the protein of those egg whites. Those protein strands elongate, they create this mesh that then traps all those air bubbles together. And as you're folding in that egg white mixture into your baked goods, those air pockets are creating that leavening, that light, that fluffy sensation in your baked good. Think like angel food cake, right? How that's really light and airy because you're using a lot of egg whites in that. Eggs are really also important in recipes for binding and for thickening. Think like custards. And then they can also be really helpful for emulsifying, which is a fancy way of saying mixing fat and oil together. Remember, fat and oil don't mix. They don't typically go together. Fat's hydrophobic, doesn't like water. But if you have an emulsifying agent like lectin, lecithin, which is in egg yolks, and you mix fat, watery ingredients, and the egg together, the lecithin, in the egg yolk helps kind of bind all of those things together. Another non-plant-based ingredient that's pretty common in baked goods is milk. And milk is a liquid, so one of its main roles in baked goods is moisture. If you've ever seen a recipe that calls for buttermilk, buttermilk is a special type of milk. It's actually traditionally, it's what's left over in the butter making process. It's the liquid that's left over. Commercially produced buttermilks nowadays are made with regular milks and some sort of bacteria added to them. So they're more like thin, really thin yogurts. But regardless of what kind of buttermilk, the purpose of buttermilk is to introduce an acidic component that helps activate baking soda and create, if you remember from probably your middle school chemistry or science classes where you mixed vinegar and baking soda together and you get a lot of foam, and that's carbon dioxide that's being produced. And the same thing happens in our baked goods when we introduce an acidic component, i.e. buttermilk, and we have our baking soda. We get that carbon dioxide formation, and that creates those gases create that leavening, that lightening, that fluffiness in our baked goods. So buttermilk is an activator of baking soda. That's its kind of primary purpose in baked goods. And then milk, because it has both natural sugars, lactose, and it has protein, it is really helpful for browning. And that's due to something called the Maillard reaction, which is basically just sugars and proteins reacting together. So that's what gives us a nice browning. So when we're thinking about the swaps that we're going to talk about next, we want to keep all of these functions of these non-plant-based foods in mind so we can make sure that the plant-based foods that we're swapping in help mimic most, if not all, of those functions. So first and foremost, we started with fat, so let's talk about some swaps for animal-based fats in our baked goods. First and foremost would be our fruit or vegetable purees. So think an unsweetened applesauce, a pumpkin puree, or a mashed banana or a banana puree. You can substitute these 1-for-1 for most oil or butter in most recipes. The only things you want to consider here, you want to make sure that you have unsweetened applesauce, because typically your baked good is going to have another source of sugar. You don't want to add more sugar into the mix if you don't need it. The pumpkin and the banana are going to have a pumpkin and a banana flavor. So think about your baked good and think about whether that flavor is going to enhance the dish that you're making, or if maybe you're making a savory baked good, banana might not be what you want to choose because maybe that banana flavor doesn't go well in a biscuit. But maybe you like banana biscuits, and that's fine too. Another great fat substitution is nut or seed butter. Now, this is a healthy fat itself, so you're not removing fat. You're not necessarily making your baked good low fat, and that's fine. It's just a healthier plant-based form of fat. So nut and seed butters, you can substitute them 1-for-1. And again, you want to keep in mind the flavor profile. Does having something that is a little bit nuttier in flavor pair with the other ingredients in the recipe you're making? Is it going to add and enhance or detract from the taste of that baked good? And something else to keep in mind if you're going to swap in the nut butters is that they will increase the density of your dish. So this is less of a problem with something like a brownie where maybe we want it to be like thicker and denser, or like a quick bread or a muffin, but it might be a little bit harder in a cookie, depending on the recipe. So just some things to think about. And we'll actually use a seed butter in a cookie and nut butter in a muffin. So you'll get to see examples of it used in a couple different ways. And then last but not least, avocado, another really great source of plant-based healthy fat that's got lots of fiber and magnesium as well. You can substitute 1-for-1 mashed avocado for your oil in a recipe. Now, the thing to keep in mind with avocado is that it does darken your baked good a little bit. So if you care about the appearance being a little bit darker, then you might want to choose one of those other fat substitutes and save avocado for something like a brownie, which is already dark, and you're not going to notice the difference in terms of the darkness. Now, it does that because if you've ever made guacamole or you've left an avocado out on the counter, you know how it turns kind of brown, and that's it oxidizing. Does the same thing when we're baking. That's all that reaction is. Now, for eggs, we've got a lot of great options that are plant-based as well. One of the most fun, because it's fun to say, and it's also really fascinating how it works, is aquafaba, which is basically just a fancy way of saying the liquid from canned chickpeas. So, yep, just the canned chickpeas from the grocery store shelf. You just shake up that can and drain off the appropriate amount that you need, and then you're not wasting that water, and it is a really great substitution for egg whites or whole eggs. We're going to practice whipping up some for one of our recipes, but you can make a meringue, which is historically just egg whites and sugar, with aquafaba. You can make a completely vegan meringue, and it is just as tasty and just as beautiful. So the substitution amounts are listed here on the slide. Again, the slides are going to be on the website, so you can go back and reference these if you don't have anything to write them down. But basically, about 3 tablespoons would be 1 whole egg. Okay. A couple other great egg substitutes that I tend to use all the time, and we're going to use in some of our recipes tonight, are ground flaxseed, and it has to be ground, and chia seed. And you substitute them with 1 tablespoon of chia seed or 1 tablespoon of your ground flaxseed and 1.5 tablespoons of water. You mix them together, let them sit for a couple minutes until it starts to gel, and that's your 1 egg. Now, you can also use silken tofu as an egg substitute. This creates a denser bake. There's a lot of protein in that tofu. So I would recommend reserving this for things like, again, brownies maybe, or you can make a really great cheesecake like that doesn't have cheese or eggs in it, just with silken tofu. So that's a good option in that scenario. And then last but not least, dairy. So if we're gonna substitute out milk in any recipes, you can use any non-dairy milk that you want to and just sub 1 for 1. Make sure it's unsweetened, again, because typically our baked goods already have sugar added to them. If you, for some reason, can't find unsweetened, just reduce the sugar in your recipe. And you also want to be mindful, again, if you're making a savory baked good, about the flavor of the non-dairy milk. A lot of them have vanilla added to them. And while that's a wonderful addition to, say, a chocolate chip cookie, it might not be what you're looking for in, again, a biscuit or something of the savory nature. If you're looking for that browning property from the dairy that you typically add to a recipe, I'd suggest subbing with oat milk, which is a little bit higher naturally in sugar than some of the other non-dairy milks. And that higher sugar content lends it to brown more readily than some of the other non-dairy milks. Okay. And again, because of that slightly higher sugar content, you might want to play around with the sugar, the other added sugar that you're putting in your recipe. And then finally, we talked a little bit about buttermilk. If you want a non-dairy swap, just use your plain non-dairy milk and add either a tablespoon of lemon juice or a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar to that 1 cup of non-dairy milk. Let it sit for a couple minutes, and then you can use that 1 for 1 in your recipe. All right. So without further ado, we are going to go ahead and get cooking. And we're going to start with our muffin recipe. So before we do that though, I'm going to take a drink of water because I've been talking at you for a little while. And all right, now we're going to get started. So this is a carrot apple muffin recipe, and you should be able to see two screens right now. Look towards where the bowl is, and that's where you'll be able to see the ingredients going in. So we're going to start with a flax egg. Okay, this is the flaxseed. I'm going to hold it up on the main camera here. There's lots of different brands. This is just Bob's Red Mill, and you can see it's kind of a teardrop shaped seed. Okay, this is a great source of omega-3 fatty acids and lignans, which is a phytoestrogen that's cardio protective and protective against breast cancer. That was whole flaxseed. We ground it. So this is what the ground looks like. Okay, and I'll hold it over both cameras. Okay, till it's kind of like a meal. And then we put 1.5 tablespoons of that with 4 tablespoons of water and mix it together. And if you can see it's kind of goopy, like an egg white might be, or like when you mix together one whole egg, it's kind of got that a little sticky, it's pretty viscous and goopy. That's what we're looking for. Okay, so we just mix the ground flaxseed and the water together and let it sit for a few minutes. That's going into our bowl. Next, we've got, I'm gonna grab a spatula. I've got 1/4 cup of almond butter. Now, the original recipe called for oil, some canola oil, and I decided that I wanted to swap out with almond butter because I thought the almond butter would taste good. If you have peanut butter, that would work too. If you have cashew butter or sunflower seed butter, or we're going to use tahini later, which is sesame seed paste, you could use that here too if you wanted to. Very flexible. So we got our almond butter. This is 1/3 cup of mashed banana. It's just a little brown because I mashed it earlier today and had it sitting in the fridge, but it should look pretty nice and light yellow when you mash it at home. So 1 medium banana, or about 1/3 cup of mashed banana. And the banana is going to add some moisture. It's going to help also kind of bind and thicken things together. And then we've got 1/2 cup of unsweetened applesauce going in here. And then we are going to mix this together. So I'm mixing just to incorporate everything. Don't have to mix too thoroughly, but that looks pretty good. So now we'll continue adding the rest of our ingredients. So we've got 1/2 cup of brown sugar that's going in here. You could reduce this a little bit. I wouldn't, if you're going to play around with this, I wouldn't reduce your sugar too much because it is adding some structure to the recipe. Okay, and then we have got some spices here. So we've got 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon going in here. And that cinnamon is adding, it's helping enhance our perception of sweetness. We're getting some anti-inflammatory properties from that. It also, I think, just really pairs well with the applesauce flavor. We're going to add 1/2 teaspoon of salt, which you could skip if you wanted to. And then 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda. Mix those in. And we've got 1/2 cup of oat milk. Again, you could use whatever non-dairy milk you wanted. This happened to be one that had a little bit of vanilla in it, so that vanilla flavor is going to, again, enhance the perception of sweetness in our muffin. I'm going to add 1 cup. This is a packed cup of carrots shredded that have been shredded on the large side of a box grater. It was 4 carrots about this size, so 4 small carrots. which would probably be about 2 large carrots. And again, I packed it pretty well in there. So we're going to add that in there. And then I've got 2/3 cup of rolled oats. And remember, these are a really good source of soluble fiber, which is that heart healthy fiber that helps with lowering cholesterol, and they're whole grain. And then we've got our flours. So we've got 2 different kinds of flours. This is our gluten-free flour that you can use 1-for-1. It's got rice flour, brown rice flour, and sorghum flour, potato flour in here as well. I'm using this because I'm gluten-free. You can use whole wheat flour in this recipe if you're not gluten-free. And if you are gluten-free, this is my favorite option. And then we're using a 1/2 cup of almond meal or almond flour. So this is just, it says blanched on here, and there's blanched and unblanched. It just blanched means that the skins were removed from the almonds before it was ground into a meal, and unblanched means it still has the skins on them. You can use them interchangeably. There's just really a color difference is the main difference between the two of them. So we're going to add those in here. And again, that's 1/2 cup of almond meal or almond flour, and then 1 cup of flour. Again, you can, I would do whole wheat if you're not gluten intolerant. And if you have celiac or are gluten intolerant, whatever gluten-free flour substitute that you prefer using, you could put that in here. So now we're going to mix this all together, incorporating those dry ingredients into the wet ingredients. And I want you to pay attention to how wet this batter is in comparison to some of the other baked goods that we're going to make, because this is also a really important tool for you as you're making swaps to your recipes, to pay attention to the moisture content, because this is what a muffin batter typically looks like. Okay, it's pretty wet and sticky. Now, if you made some swaps and it ends up really dry, then you know that, okay, you need to incorporate some more moisture into this recipe. And so maybe you want to add some applesauce, or you want to add some non-dairy milk or something to get it to be this consistency. Okay. And opposite, if it's really, really wet and runny, then you know, okay, maybe I want to add a little bit more of that almond meal. I need to add a little bit more of my flour. Okay, now we are going to put it into our muffin tin here. I'm using a number 16 scoop. Show that to you right here on the camera. It's just a 1/4 cup scoop, so it's 4 ounces. I like using the scoops just because this gets this little button here, there's a little scraper, and it scrapes the bowl here of the scoop and gets the batter out really nicely instead of me having to dig in and scrape or bang. If you don't have one, totally fine. If you do a lot of baking, might be something worth investing in. You can also use a 1/4 cup measuring cup. Works just as well. All right, so we're gonna fill our muffin tins here. And the idea is that you would just go through and fill this whole thing up with your muffin batter, and then you stick it in the oven, and we bake it at 375 for 30 minutes. And voila, we get these beautiful, gorgeous, nice and brown, healthy muffins that you could use as a grab and go out the door breakfast option, or as a nice treat after dinner. There's recipe number 1. Now, recipe number 2, we are going to make, and thank you, Laura, an avocado brownie. So I know, sounds funny, right? But I promise you, it is very, very tasty. And we are going to start with 1 avocado. Okay, I am going to slice it. And use our fork here to get it out into the bowl. And we want all of the avocado, so as much as I can out. And you want to make sure your avocado is pretty ripe. You want it to be pretty soft for this application because you're going to mash it. And if you have a firm avocado, it won't mix throughout the recipe and you'll just be getting chunks of avocado as you bite into your brownie. And that might not be what you're going for. All right, so I'm going to set those aside. And now what we're going to do is just mash the avocado finely. And we're also going to use an immersion blender to help with the chunk, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. All right, we got that. One avocado. We've got a half a cup of maple syrup that's going into here. We've got 1 3/4 cup of non-dairy milk. And then we are going to just mix that all together. I'm going to use our handy dandy immersion blender. For those of you who don't know what an immersion blender is, if you look at the main screen, you'll see the full thing. This is the motor at the top, and this wand part has a little blade that helps kind of blend things together. It's really great for soups, and it's really helpful in applications like this where I want the avocado to be less chunky and more smooth. So I'm just gonna zap this and try not to splatter avocado over my skin. All right, I think that's pretty good. Not worried about being perfect, but I just want to get as many of those avocado chunks as possible. All right, next we are going to add a half cup of unsweetened cocoa powder in here. We've got a little bit of salt. I've got a 1 teaspoon of baking soda. And then this is 1 cup, again, of that gluten-free flour. You would use whole wheat flour, again, if you don't have a gluten sensitivity. Okay, we're going to mix that all together. Can you hand me that spatula that's in that bowl, please? Thank you much. All right, we are mixing just to get our dry ingredients incorporated into our wet here. And I don't know if you can tell already the consistency, like how it compares to the muffin batter. It's fairly similar. It's a little bit on the drier side than our muffin batter. Okay, I'm just going to get all my batter off my whisk here. If you don't have a whisk in your kitchen, totally fine. A fork works great in this application as well. But if you are going to do any amount of baking, having a whisk can be really helpful. It's also helpful for making sauces and a lot of other things. So it's a worthwhile kitchen investment, and they're not that expensive. Put that on our tray here. All right. Last but not least, we add in some chocolate chips. So we've got a half a cup of chocolate chips. These are dark chocolate chips. We're going to fold those in with our spatula. And again, I'm just looking for any dry spots in here. So if I see any streaks of white from the flour or light brown from the cocoa powder, I want to make sure those are mixed in all the way. All right, now we're ready to stick it into our tray. I've got a 8x8 glass baking dish here. I'm going to stick the batter into this tray. And then I'm going to use my spatula to spread it evenly throughout the dish. We want to get it pretty even so that it bakes consistently, because if it's, there's less batter on one side and more on the other, we'll get some undercooked goopy spots, and then we'll get some spots that are dried out. So as consistently as possible. All right. And then we take this, we stick it into a 350-degree oven for about 40 minutes. And then we come out with this dark, beautiful, decadent chocolate brownie. And these are delicious. These are from the Plant You cookbook. We've used several of the recipes in some of our other classes. Highly recommend that cookbook if you're looking for some easy plant-forward recipes. These are tasty brownies. They're always a hit whenever I've made them. And Laura, who's here with me tonight, said that they're her son-in-law's favorite brownies. So there you go. Lots of endorsements for that recipe. All right. Our next recipe, we're going to do some cookies. Or when you get a chance, can you move that other one down for me? Thank you. We are going to make a almond flour cookie. Now, this cookie is kind of like a tea cookie. If you've ever had Russian tea cakes, which are pretty nutty, this is very similar to those. It goes very well if you're someone who celebrates like a high Christmas tea, or you enjoy a warm cup of tea in the evenings. This might be a nice treat to pair with those. Okay, so to start, we are going to work with our aquafaba. So remember, that is the starchy liquid from our can of chickpeas. We've got a 1/4 cup here. So it's kind of, I'll hold it up to the phone. You can see that better. It's viscous. It's more viscous or thicker than water. And it's got kind of that yellow hue to it. So it almost looks like an egg white already. We're going to use a fork and just whisk that aquafaba for a couple minutes. And you can see as I'm whisking it, it's starting to get foamy. Okay, that's air being incorporated into the aquafaba. The research is still out as to why and how the aquafaba is able to create the same type of structure like an egg white is when it has very, very different proteins. There's some thought that because chickpeas have saponins, or this compound that helps kind of with that soap formation, that's what's helping to create the bubbles and the structure that holds the air. But still up for research. So if you want a research project to find out, you can look into why does aquafaba do this. Regardless of why it does it, it's amazing that it works, and it works really well for adding a lightness and fluffiness, that aeration and leavening to baked goods. Okay, so you're only really doing this for a couple minutes. And as you can see, it's really foamy. It's changed quite a lot from that liquid that we looked at. First of all, I'm just going to mix it just a little bit more. You could also do this with a whisk. Or you could use, if you've got a stand mixer, you can use the whisk on the stand mixer. I tried this with an immersion blender, and I wouldn't recommend that. The blades on the immersion blender, and I think the intensity of the motor, it goes too fast, and you're blending rather than incorporating air into it. So you want the whisk or you want the fork, because that's what's actually going to help you fold the air into the dish. Okay. We've got our aquafaba. I've got 2 1/4 cups of almond flour. Again, that same almond flour that I showed you before, that's going to go in here. We've got 2/3 cups of granulated sugar that's going in here. Syrup goes here. And then we're going to take our fork. I'm going to mix the sugar and the flour together. I've got a 1/2 teaspoon of, a 1/4 teaspoon of almond extract. I'm going to add that into my aquafaba. Okay. And then I am going to pour my aquafaba into my almond flour here, use my spatula. And I'm going to use this spatula to fold it in. Now, watch in amazement because I was like, okay, quarter cup of aquafaba and all that almond flour, that's not gonna work, but it does. So we'll just gotta mix very well. And you're just going, this is a pretty crumbly cookie recipe, and we're gonna actually use our hands to roll these into balls. So it's okay that it's looking like this. I don't need it to be really wet and stuck together, but I want it to be thoroughly mixed. So I'm gonna go a little bit longer here. So we've got kind of uniform crumbles, and I don't see any spots that are too dry. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. So that's kind of what we're going for here. Okay, it's pretty crumbly. Get that off. And then what we're going to do, or can I hand you that, please? Thank you. We are going to take about a half cup of slivered almonds. Okay, so these guys right here. I'm going to put them into a bowl. And then I am going to make both ball sizes, about 2 tablespoons worth of dough. Okay, I'm going to roll it into a ball. I'm going to press and roll it into a ball. And then I am going to roll it in these almonds. Now you kind of have to press the almonds into it, and you're not going for it to be completely coated. We just want some almonds stuck onto it like that. Okay, and then you're going to stick it onto a parchment lined baking sheet. That parchment paper is going to keep the cookies from sticking. Okay, it's also going to help with some browning, and it's going to make cleanup a lot easier. Okay, so I'm going to roll the ball. I'm pressing the dough together and rolling it, and then I'm sticking the almonds onto it and placing it on my cookie sheet. And you would continue doing that until your cookie sheet is filled. This makes about 12 cookies. So you'll fill 1 sheet tray, 3 across, 4 down with your cookie dough. And then you're going to stick it into an oven, 350 degrees for about 10 minutes. And when they come out, they look like this. You've got some beautiful, golden, tasty, kind of like a shortbread cookie. So hopefully everybody can see those. They're very tasty and yummy. There is a good amount of sugar in them, so note that if you're watching your sugar intake, be mindful of how many of these you consume. All right, now our very last recipe of the night, and we've got some announcements and end of year housekeeping to take care of. Our very last recipe is also from the Plant You cookbook, and this is a cookie with a surprising ingredient. It's a tahini chocolate chip cookie. And if you remember from previous classes, we've made some savory dishes with tahini. Tahini, right here in this bowl, is a sesame seed paste. So it's sesame seeds just ground up together. We're looking for this recipe for a sesame seed paste that is on the runnier side, so more liquid. We want that liquid to incorporate into the dish. We're using a half cup of tahini in this recipe, and we are going to combine that with, we've got a half cup of tahini, and I'm going to use my spoon to scrape all of that out. I've got a third cup of maple syrup with a teaspoon of vanilla mixed in. Okay, and then I am going to whisk these to combine. So again, I'm mixing my fat and my sugar together. And then I've got 1 cup of oat flour. Now, if you don't have oat flour lying around, but say you have rolled oats, you could make your own oat flour with a coffee grinder or a spice grinder. That's exactly what I did. So I just put a 1/4 cup at a time, some whole rolled oats into a spice grinder, and or if you have like a high powered blender, like a Vitamix or a Ninja or something, you could probably do the same thing. And then I kept doing that until I had my 1 cup of oat flour. So 1 cup of oat flour, I've got a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder that's going in here. And I'm going to mix those until they're nice and combined. And then I'm going to add my dry ingredients a little bit at a time to my wet ingredients. There. Just going to keep going until they're fully combined. Shake off my whisk here. Fork. A knife works really well in this instance when you're trying to get the dough off of the whisk, or you could just use your spatula and avoid this problem altogether. The tahini is really sticky. So I think I'm going to use my spatula for the remainder of this. Okay. So I'm going to use my spatula, fold in the rest of my dry flour here. And the last ingredient, I've got some chocolate chips. So a 1/4 cup of dark chocolate chips going in my bowl. And I'm just mixing until we have those all combined. So I'm just trying to get the chocolate chips mixed throughout so that every cookie has a good amount of dark chocolate mixed in. The nice thing about this recipe, if you remember from our previous classes, tahini has a slight bitter flavor. And if you remember from our flavor class, bitter and sweet kind of balance each other out. Also salt. So the recipe calls for when these cookies are finished, to sprinkle them with a little bit of salt. So that all kind of works really well to create a really balanced, very delicious cookie. So your next step to get them into cookie form. Okay. Yes, thank you. Is to take your scoop. This is a 3/4 ounce scoop or a number 40 scoop. And it's about 2 tablespoons. Okay. That doesn't have to be what you use. Again, I just kind of like the size and I like the scoops because instead of using 2 tablespoons, which is totally what you could do, you're not scraping and just makes it a cleaner, easier process. So you just put them little scoops onto your cookie sheet. And we fill this whole cookie sheet up. This recipe also makes about a dozen cookies. So you get the drill, just fill your cookie sheet, and then you pop them into a 400-degree oven, so a little bit warmer than we're typically baking our cookies at, for about 12 minutes. And then they come out this nice, beautiful golden brown color. And you could skip the salt if you wanted to, or if you are going to top them with salt, what you would want to use is a Maldon, which is like a flaky sea salt, as opposed to your typical iodized table salt. Those bigger kind of flaky chunks is what you're looking for. So those are our 4 recipes. Hopefully they gave you some ideas for how to swap some of the ingredients we talked about into maybe some of your favorite baked goods, or you got some new ideas for a plant-forward baked good that you can try this holiday season at one of your upcoming gatherings. Before we break for the night, I do want to share my screen again real quick. So just wanted to let everybody know, again, this is our last class of this year's Cooking with Plants series, but our team has other classes. If you want to participate, if your interest in lifestyle medicine has been piqued and you're curious to learn about all of the other pillars outside of whole food plant-based nutrition and even dive further into whole food plant forward nutrition, this Foundations of Lifestyle Medicine class series is coming up next year. We have 4 different cohorts of the class, 2 of which are during the day from the noon to 1:30 time frame. And then we've got 2 other sessions that are in the evening. So hopefully those times, one of those times would work for your schedule. The dates are here on the slide. If this is interesting to you and you want to learn more, please email lifestylemedicine@trinityhealth.org, and we will get you the information about the course and what you might need to do in order to register. It's a 6-week series. We meet once a week and we cover 1 pillar a week, and you get really in-depth information and science behind the recommendations. And then we go through some skill building exercises to help you put into practice what you've learned. And then thanks to your feedback and the positive responses that we've received for this class series, we are going to be offering this Cooking with Plants series again next year, which I'm really excited. And I hope that you'll come back and join us again and tell friends and invite family members to join you as well. If you want to register, again, if you open up the camera function on your phone and you hold it up to that QR code, you should see a yellow box go around the QR code and a little link pop up. You just click on that. It'll take you to a Microsoft form that you can fill out to register. And then you will, just like this year, receive the links to join the classes as they come up. One thing that we're doing differently next year is we're moving the date. So instead of Tuesday evenings, our classes are going to be on Wednesday evenings. Same time frame. They'll still be recorded if you can't make them, and they're always going to be free and via this Microsoft Teams platform. So hopefully that makes that accessible, and hopefully you'll be able to join us again. And then last but not least, what I ask you to do every class, if you could please fill out our survey. This is our very last one, so it's not just for this class, it's for our entire series. And you just heard that we're offering this class series again. And so your feedback about the series as a whole is going to really help me adjust the course and make sure that it's meeting needs and it's really delivering the content that you want. So please scan that QR code. It'll also come to you in an email, so you can click that link as well. But please, please, please fill it out. And if you do, you will be entered in a drawing to win the Plant New cookbook that we've talked about so much in class and used so many of the recipes from, and this really cool microgreens grow kit from Hamama Greens that makes growing microgreens really foolproof. You just use this black tray, and you have these little seed quilts in here. You open them up. You fill this tray with water to this fill line. You set your seed quilt in here after you've taken it out of the package. And in a week or so, you have lots of beautiful health promoting microgreens. There's some broccoli sprouts in here. If you remember, those are full of sulforaphane, which is a really, really potent phytonutrient, great for anti-cancer and decreasing inflammation. So if you fill out the survey, you could win that microgreens kit and the cookbook. And then, as always, our class website is available to you with all of the recordings and the recipes from classes like tonight's class and all of the classes in our past series. And we'll probably keep those up through the new year. So if you haven't had time to go back and watch a class, or you want to download some recipes that you haven't had a chance, do that now. And if any questions come up with either the survey or the class website or tonight's class, please, as always, email us at lifestylemedicine@trinityhealth.org. And with that, I think we'll let everybody go a few minutes early to make up for the times that I've gone a little bit over our class. It's been a pleasure to get to spend the year cooking with plants with you. I hope you've learned a lot. I appreciate you joining me, and I really hope that you will join us again next year when we do it all again. Take good care and have wonderful holidays.